Hey, welcome. I want to talk about today. It's been covered in the news and the client asked about it. Stamp duty in New South Wales and Victoria looks like it might be set to turn into a land tax, broad-based land tax. What are the implications of that, that sort of thing? The client said he's looking at buying in the near future and he just wants to know, okay, well, what are the implications going to be for me? So I want to talk about that, but also, broadly speaking, who are the beneficiaries, who are the losers in this, and how it's going to kind of change things generally speaking in a couple of different areas. First of all, I want to chat about my assumptions. So what I want to work out is how much per household does this generate? Now I'm using very kind of basic figures, very basic broad brush kind of figures. What I want to work out is, okay, well, what does the land tax need to be for the government to be receiving the same revenue? So when we talk about, okay, we're cutting this tax or we're abolishing this tax, in reality, that's not occurring. What is happening is that the tax, the structure of the tax is changing. And so there's structural reform that's occurring, not actually, oh yeah, we just pay less tax. Because if the stamp duty tax is completely taken away, then the state government is going to have a lot less money to actually spend on public goods and that sort of things. The things that actually help us live an enjoyable life. So it actually would be quite bad for us if the state lost all that revenue, and in reality they couldn't. So what we're doing is replacing a tax, not abolishing a tax. So I want to make that clear for anyone who thinks, oh yeah, cool, there's just no one's going to pay for this. Someone always pays for something. Anything that needs to be paid for or has been paid for, someone's paying for it. So just understand that. So turnover 5%. So I'm assuming, and I'm primarily looking at Sydney because most of you guys are in Sydney, most of my clients are in Sydney, that we're really kind of concentrating this on Sydney and how much Sydney households currently, put through in terms of stamp duty, and what the equivalent would be in land tax, assuming that Sydney is then taxed on a similar sort of rate. Now, pretty broad brush kind of assumptions. So one thing I want to know is turnover. So turnover is when stamp duty actually occurs, when a property transacts. So I'm assuming that happens every 5 years. Now, in terms of historically how that's kind of gone about, it's gone up and down a little bit above and below that level. There was a 2017 piece done by some of the guys at the RBA, and I'm just going to bring up a graph there for you guys to see. Very, very low level dodgy graphics, obviously holding up a screen to the camera. Hopefully you saw that. Needless to say, if you look up housing market turnover 2017 or RBA, you'll be able to find the piece that I kind of got that from. Anyway, the point being, over the last 10 years prior to doing this study, they averaged out around 5.5%. Now, I know recently in the last couple of years, it's been lower. So I've assumed that the average that we could be looking at is about 5%. So that's where that comes from. So properties are transacted on every 20 years. So the next assumption I had in Sydney, median dwelling price in Sydney across properties, units, houses is $830,000. I get that from basically just realestate.com. So pretty kind of broad brush, basic figures that I'm using, and I'm getting there. And that's for Sydney. That's not for New South Wales as a whole. So, assuming that you're happy with my assumptions, and it doesn't matter too much if there is some difference, what we're trying to learn really is just broad brush speaking, what will it kind of look like if the government needs to keep the same revenue? And of course they do. So, what is the stamp duty that's transacted on every 20 years or so? It is approximately 32,782. So that is the cost of stamp duty for a property selling at $830,000 in Sydney. So what does that equate to if we were paying a land tax every year essentially what I'm going to do is divide that number by 20. So over the course of 20 years, which is the cycle of your average one transaction, let's get each year added up to equal this. Now, some of you are going to talk about, well, net present value of this and that, and making kind of assumptions about inflation. You're now paying something over progressive years as opposed to all up front. Sure, there are huge differences there. But from a basic kind of look at this, I think it's probably okay just to divide by 20 and give us a roundabout sort of figure. If it's up or down from that a little bit, so be it. So 32,782 divided by 20 is 1639. So when you think about it like that, in the city that is certainly most expensive in Australia and one of the most expensive in the world, adding that onto rates essentially, so at the moment we've got council rates, now we would have a state-based land tax. So we've essentially got property rates on local council level and a state council level, state government level, with the introduction of this tax. So in reality, that doesn't seem like too much on the face of it, which is good. Now, how is this actually going to affect prices? So over the course of that 20 years as well, obviously house prices are increasing, so that number will increase just from that point of view anyway. Now, obviously, I don't even know how it's kind of... So the assumption is that property prices increase or double every 7 years. It's definitely not true in like longer historical terms, maybe over the last 40 years, periods, yes. Going past that, no, it's not true at all. But the housing market and how we buy and sell property over the last, like around the 1950s, 1960s, post-World War II, dramatically changed in that governments started pushing citizens into buying their own property. And then that kind of evolved into, okay, buy your own property and buy investment properties as well. So we've certainly had some evolutions kind of occur over that time. That interest rates come down. We can't have those two things on a continuing basis. So we can't start now encouraging people more to buy their own homes. They've already been encouraged that. So that catalyst has already occurred. So we can't recatalyze that because it's already in play. The other one being interest rates going down. There are some, could we go into negative rates? We could, but we can't really go too far into them. And there are some systemic issues that occur when we do that. So the interest rates they've kind of come to their low point and probably their long-term average, and probably where they kind of need to sit. That's probably not going to change either. So are we going to be doubling every 7 years in nominal terms, which means like the actual dollars that you see from time to time maybe, and potentially over the next kind of 10 to 15 years, at some points, potentially we will, because we will have some periods of pretty high inflation, I would think, just because of all the extra money that's being pumped into the system right now. Needless to say, I'm not really talking about that here. So, will this come in for new purchases only? That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So let's take the assumption that over 20 years, let's say 100% of properties get sold. Let's just assume that over 20 years. Here's 10, here's 1, 2, 4, 5, yada, yada, yada. So year 1, 5% of properties sold. Year 2, another 5%, and so 10% by year 2 are sold. Year 3, 15%, yada, yada, yada. I'm obviously, this is terrible scale. Year 4, etc., etc., etc. Now, the point I'm making is if we say, okay, right now, no more stamp duty, but all you people have already bought and paid stamp duty, you've essentially paid this tax already, so we're not going to tax you again. What that means is everyone who transacts now, year 1, that 5% will be wearing this entire tax that was equating to 100% previously, now we're getting 5% of the revenue, because what we're getting is a 20th of people starting to pay land tax. And in that first year, let's say it's a 20th of whatever the normal stamp duty is. Year 2, now we've got 10%. But now we've already lost, over 2 years, we've received 7.5% of the 100% that we would have used to. And so this just kind of continues. And it takes us 20 years, if we're only charging new purchases from now on, land tax, for us to actually get to a point where we're kind of now receiving 100% again. Now that's assuming that we are equating the land tax to essentially sort of a 20th of it. I mean, change that around however you kind of want. That's fine, but I mean, let's say it was 10 years. It'd take us 10 years. 10 years is too long. And it's turnover is definitely nowhere near 10%. On average, certainly nowhere near 10% either. So that's one issue. So if we're to start this, we would need to kind of start it as now for everyone really. Otherwise, buying a property, if we're then saying, okay, well, land tax has to be kind of equivalent to what stamp duty was, so that this year we actually make it back. Well, then your land tax for year 1 is going to be like similar to what stamp duty was. So that can't work. Essentially, the government is going to have some, maybe a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So people who've already paid stamp duty pay a lower amount of land tax perhaps, and people who just buy property now who are not paying stamp duty that they would have a couple of months ago, etc., are now paying a higher level of land tax for the first couple of years or something like that. So an ability to transition. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but in reality, we can't just say, okay, everyone who's bought a place with stamp duty, you're not paying land tax until that place is sold, and whoever now buys it, that can't happen. So that's one thing that I kind of want to note. So big losers will be people who have recently transacted and paid stamp duty prior to this coming in, unless there's some pretty heavy discounting for the fact that they've just paid stamp duty going forward. And I'm not sure that'd be possible because the tax still needs to be paid. All right, so that's what I want to kind of cover off first. Secondly, so one thing that it's going to cause is, let's say for a normal property, the price is, I'm going to say it's $1 million. Just some of you are going to be like, well, $1 million is nowhere near what I'd ever spend, but anyway, that's fine. But it's a nice round number for me. Now, in a transaction, at $1 million, you're paying 4% stamp duty, and below that, you're still paying generally around 4% or pretty close to 4%. So I'm going to assume we're paying 4% stamp duty. Now, on top of that, I'm going to assume as well we're paying about 3.5% other costs. So these would be agents' fees. Now, these will differ for different areas, but let's say agents' fees are, let's say they're 2%. Then you've got 1.5% still, and that's going to be things like you're going to be paying for removalists, they're going to be conveyancing, so solicitors' fees. You might even be kind of buying new furniture and that sort of thing. Obviously, if it's like, you're not necessarily going to be kind of wearing these costs or having these costs. But let's say on average, let's say that's 2 to 3% really. Let's say on $1 million property at the moment, you've got, actually let's even cut it down to say $70,000 costs. So let's say those costs are 3%, be a little more conservative with them. What's going to occur is, okay, cool, we don't have stamp duty anymore. So our transaction costs, the overall transaction, now stamp duty is the buyer's paying that. A large portion of this is being paid by the seller, but ultimately that doesn't really matter. It's transaction costs of the one transaction. So what we're doing is we're more than halving the transaction costs. And so the new transaction costs will essentially be whatever the agent's fee is and whatever kind of the moving fees are. So it could even be as low as sort of, depending on the agent, what cost you can get, maybe 1.5%. So agents' fees might be 1%, 0.5% for like basic conveyancing and moving, do-it-yourself, or whatever. Somewhere maybe 3.5%. So it will be a range, but it will be so much smaller than the, let's say, 5.5% to 7.5% than it would have been previously. Now, the issue with that, I mean, it sounds really, really nice, but the issue is with that is that people start, oh wow, what's going on there? People will start buying and selling property more like they sell and buy shares at the moment. Now, what will that cause? What will an increase in the amount of transactions that are taking place or able to take place mean? It means that an asset which was previously transacted on not as much, so let's say 5%, so its cycles kind of went more like that. Let's say it increases transactions on properties to, I don't know, 15%, 20%, so I don't know, double, triple, quadruples. What it means is we're going to see much higher volatility. Now, the reason that is because I'm going to jump on here because I've got FOMO and I'm like, oh, I've got to get on the property ladder. I've got to get on the property ladder. And I say to myself, you know what? This is going to make some short-time money. I'll just buy in now. It's going to make me 10%, whatever. Like how people often think about the share market. Certainly now you see that going up and down and up and down. Went down massively. Now it's back up, roaring back up. And you know what? Worst case, I'll just sell in a couple of months and I'll be able to make all this money. Fantastic. Let's just do that. And so then we'll come to another peak. People will start selling, and there won't be this, what some people kind of think about at the moment is they say, oh, I can just hold on to my property. There's no point selling now and buying in a year because the overall transaction costs are kind of 7 to 8%. I can say, well, the overall transaction costs are 1.5 to 3% or whatever. Well, I can sell now and I can buy in the future, and I don't need to worry too much. Even if I buy in at the same price, again, it's fine. The transaction costs are a lot smaller, so I can kind of try and do that, jiggle that and play that. And so you'll get more people selling in a down market, which will push prices down faster, quicker. As we see in those more liquid markets, share markets are a really good example where kind of we see that little bit of FOMO either way. Fear of missing out of selling or shorting, fear of not getting on the big runs. So will it create more volatility in the market? Yes, it will. I mean, what does that mean? Cool, what else? So who is going to benefit from that? Who's going to benefit from these ups and downs and the lower transaction costs? Essentially, the people who are going to benefit most, if we say, okay, well, this is time. This is 20 years. Essentially, if you bought previously, old mate here comes along, buys a house day dot and sells it here, and every kind of 20 years he buys and sells another. So that is the equivalent to the average spend per person on stamp duty. So that person is transacting every 20 years. So that person, assuming the tax is kind of proportionate, that person's probably going to be the same. Now, if you are buying and selling properties more often, you're going to be a net beneficiary of this compared to under the old scheme. And how that works is, let's say year 2, year 4, you're kind of selling and buying, 6, selling and buying another one, selling and buying another one, or just transacting by either buying or selling, but essentially making more transactions than that one every 20 years. What it means is that you're not paying a big lump sum on stamp duty again, which was essentially the equivalent before to holding a property for 20 years. You're paying stamp duty on a 20-year long purchase. Now what you're doing is you're still doing that over the 20 years with one purchase, but you're doing it per property over time. And so here you're paying your 1.5% instead of 5.5%. Here you're paying your 1.5% overall transaction cost. Here you're paying your overall 1.5 transaction cost. And so those people who buy and sell property more will be net beneficiaries. Those people who say, hey, I'm, I don't know, in my 20s, found the house of my dreams, buy it and live there for 60 years, and you've bought here and maybe you sell and then downsize way in the future or something like that, you'll be a net loser. Now the reason is because under the old system, you would have paid stamp duty right at the start. So let's say you're the average, you pay your $32,000 right at the front, and then you don't pay any more land tax for that period of time. Under the new system, if you're paying land tax on the property, you'd be paying it for the first 20 years, and then you would have kind of got the equivalent or pay the equivalent to if you'd paid it in one lump sum, but then you'll keep paying it, which you wouldn't have done previously under the other situation. And so over the course of your lifetime, let's say you get to 20, you get to 40, you get to 60, you've essentially paid maybe triple the amount of tax under land tax as you would have under stamp duty. So there are definitely going to be some net beneficiaries. So house flippers are going to be one of them, depending on how, I guess, investment properties are then taxed as well. Will there be taxes brought in on how long you actually own a property for? Now, there are some at the moment, but in terms of are there going to be differences kind of made around being able to house flip or hold on to a property and make that not as beneficial from a tax position, so that we just don't have this kind of flurry of flippers entering the market. So another one who will benefit, and this is the one that I'm probably, if I'm excited about an area that's being helped, it would be nomads. So nomads in terms of, I guess, labour force nomads. So if I live here, but there's a really good job opportunity here, at the moment my transaction costs to sell here and buy here are high. If that's low, it means that the flow of the labour force around the country is much better. There's a much higher flow, so more people can get connected to the right job in the right area, because it's easier to transact and move your property there. So sell and buy another property there. So that will definitely be one good positive impact. On the overall economy, and I definitely like that component of it. Right now, do homeowners or non-homeowners benefit more? Well, we don't really know the fine print. The government will probably try to bring it in so that it's fairly equitable. Generally speaking, it seems like most tax moves seem to be made and they kind of benefit homeowners more than non-homeowners to an extent, generally speaking. But I mean, we don't have any sort of fine print at all. All we have really is stamp duty will replace it with land tax and it'll be better and more efficient. The devil will be in the detail. So really we don't know. Assuming that it is just a simple, broad-based, okay, no more stamp duty, now we have land tax, then non-homeowners would definitely benefit because they'd be able to just walk into a house or buy a house now that, let's say 3 months ago, they paid $32,000 stamp duty or would have, now they pay none. So from that perspective, non-homeowners in the early stages would benefit greatly from this. Or non-homeowners who are becoming homeowners in the near future, because they would benefit in a very short period of time from like buying 3 months later as opposed to now. Okay, interest rates. Interest rates is an interesting one. I think interest rates will be affected negatively. Now the reason will be is because of that underlying volatility. So part of the reason why banks at the moment are able to lend at such low rates to residential property is because it is fairly stable. Now, part of the stability is in the transaction costs being fairly high, which I understand sounds crazy. People can disagree with me, that's fine. But the fact that we've got low levels, 5% turnover, that means that prices are fairly stable. And as I said, we've got people at the moment who are like, I won't sell now, I'll ride this wave out. Because if we've got everyone on the wave who's like, well, I should sell now while the wave is here, that kind of coming back to that FOMO, fear of missing out on an upswing or a downswing, Fear of missing out on downswing by going, okay, well, I just have to sell now rather than at the bottom. Fear of missing out on an upswing being someone who doesn't own a property and who's buying into a property. Now, I'm not talking at all about how this will affect someone with one property compared to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That devil's going to be in the detail, definitely. But property in general. So how will the interest rate be affected negatively? The reason is because a higher rate of volatility, the bank can rely on that underlying asset less. So when we look at something like margin loans, for example, that banks also issue out, part of the risk with the share market is that huge volatility and up and down kind of swings. We don't really want to see that in our property market, but this would cause that to an extent. Now, would we if there's enough things that kind of outweigh it on the other side, maybe we wouldn't see it at all. But this, thinking about nothing else, the fact that this would cause higher amount of transactions, then that's likely to cause a higher amount of volatility. That they just go hand in hand. So if the underlying market is more volatile, banks will regard it as a more risky asset, and so interest rates will be increased, and loan to value ratios may be decreased, because who wants to lend 90% or 95% to an asset that isn't on that kind of nice steady uprise, but might be down, or who knows. As I said, we don't know too much detail as yet, but it does have bipartisan support in both states, I believe. So it is likely that it's going to be something that's brought in fairly soon. The reason I think because that it hasn't been as yet is just the difficulty with going, okay, well, exactly how do we implement that? So coming back to that problem that I spoke about before, being that, okay, well, what about someone who's just bought a property, paid $32,000? Do we now just start lumping them, and at the same time going, well, we kind of have to, because the broad-based land tax kind of comes into effect now, and so these guys do need to start paying it, because the state needs money to fund things. That's probably pretty much everything that I think I wanted to cover there. Keen to hear any comments or thoughts, or anything to the contrary, or anything like that. Broadly speaking, who will be kind of the, if you're looking at buying a property in the future, like what's going to happen? I would say that, assuming they work out a way where it is still equitable for people who've just bought a property and people in the future who've bought a property, which will be hard. If it's inequitable, it'll probably be in non-homeowners to homeowners' favour, so someone who's buying a house in the future, once it's brought in. But let's say that they work out how to make that equitable. As I said, will be hard. Then at the end of the day, it's the person who's going to benefit is going to be that person who is best able to look at the market for what it is, and be able to find kind of those bargain areas, or those people who need to sell. Because obviously in an asset like a property, which is pretty huge, I mean, normally if the general trend's going up, cool, you're probably going to do well wherever you buy into it potentially. With property, it's a huge asset. You might just be buying one in your entire life sort of thing, or one at a time. Then kind of catching a property here could be a big difference over the first 5 years or whatever to catching it there, if that was a, 20% upswing, let's say. So yeah, that's my general thoughts.